My name's Karen Cohen. I'm the board member of Blockchain, one of the board members of Blockchain Australia, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of Women in Blockchain. So this is a lovely event. I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of all of the lands from which we come at the moment, and because we're all multi-scattered across Australia and the world. I saw Tessie joining us from New York. Thank you, Tessie. And so, yeah, wanted just to acknowledge the past and present owners of Australia. I wanted just to talk a little bit about Women in Blockchain and why we're here. So Tessie started it in New York and Katrina brought it to Australia in 2017. And this is our first national event. So we've got Karen, myself and Kaya who run it in Melbourne, Lucy and Cindy from Sydney. We've got Abiti and JP from Perth. So we're pretty national now, which is really exciting. We really want this to be a safe place. So we allow men and women and everything in between to join us. We are not exclusively about women, but this industry is 90% male still, and we want to create a space where we can actually ask questions, feel safe, learn about the technology, learn about the language, and not feel like it's a place where we can't ask questions or feel unsafe to do that. So that's really what it's about. It's not about getting under the hood, as Katrina says. We just want to invite people and be inviting and be a great place to meet. And it's a shame that we can't all meet in person, but we will do again very soon. I wanted to just talk a bit about the fact that on the Blockchain Australia side, there's a few things happening. Obviously, we've been very pleased to be part of the blockchain roadmap, and Nick Giaretto has been a wonderful co-chair on that committee, and working with Leanne and with Adriana and now Chloe and Louise Talbot on that. And so we're excited to hear about what's been happening with the roadmap tonight. Nick, our CEO, has resigned from his role and will be finishing up on the 30th of June. And we are currently advertising for a new CEO. So I will share a link in the chat a little bit later when I've got my hands free of how you can apply if you're interested, or you can reach out to myself or David Jackson on the board. What else is happening? We are a membership organisation. Obviously, we make our money from membership. We run events like this across Australia, and we'll be having more regular events. We'd love you to be individual members or corporate members. We've got a special at the moment for $69 to join for the next financial year, and there'll be lots of perks, so we'll put that in the chat as well. So we invite you to support us to support you as an industry. And we want to really welcome Chloe into her role as the lead of the blockchain roadmap. This is her first public event of speaking, I think. And Katrina will be leading and moderating the panel, which will include Adriana and Leanne Kemp as well. And they're also both on the roadmap. And just a little bit of housekeeping is that we will be having meeting rooms at the end. So there'll be a few. So myself and Kaya will be moderating a little room for new people. So if you want to come along to that one, or you can go to a room with Kat and Adriana to ask more about tonight, or Leanne and Lucy, or Chloe and Cindy. So just message Blockchain Australia in your chat about which room you want to come and join. Join my room, would be good. And also questions for tonight for the panel, please message in the chat Blockchain Australia, and Amy Rose will pass them on through. Amy Rose is here as our membership manager and helping us to run our first complex online meeting. So she'll be putting the questions through to the panel, and Katrina will moderate those. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. I think there are a few glitches, so we'll just keep trying to admit people as we go through. And I'm going to hand over to the fabulous Katrina. Thanks.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming together on this Wednesday night all across Australia and to those overseas. So I want to make a special mention to Tessie Moraine, who's joining us from New York. Hey Tessie, The reason why we actually are doing this in this country is obviously something that she started in New York. I was very fortunate to participate in one of her meetups. I was so inspired that obviously I came back to Australia and set this up back in 2017. Now we have an amazing panel tonight. I'm very, very pleased. I mean, because I think one of the outcomes of this whole horrible situation is we're actually getting a lot more innovative around how we come together to actually pull an entire country together on this platform and have these amazing speakers is quite incredible, because I normally just only get to interview one person at a time. So I'm going to get started. I do believe that Leanne has joined our room now, so she's somewhere around, but we'll find her in a moment. But I wanted to get started. And for those people on the call, I think a lot of you have a deep understanding of where this technology has come from in this country. A lot of you on this call are friends and co-workers and collaborators, where we've drudged ourselves, you know, through the last few years at our meetups, at our panels and our many conferences and our delegations international, trying to have a national conversation with this technology to really get the government to understand that there is a role to play with this tech in the way that this country is going to be developed, but we really needed to have that policy framework behind us. So it was just over 15 months ago down in Adelaide at another blockchain conference where Minister Karen Andrews, who announced at that event that her government would focus on developing a national blockchain roadmap. And obviously we had the election, and then in February this year, that roadmap was delivered. And the people on this panel who we're going to be talking to tonight have had an involvement in that journey. Chloe will talk about her particular journey, but with Adriana and Leanne, they're one of some of our stalwart, you know, been around for a long time, and having their involvement in the committee ensured that the blockchain community's voice was embedded in this roadmap. So a lot of stuff has happened since February. We didn't realize that we'd be in this crisis of a pandemic, but what's also come out of it is that in less than 2 weeks, or even within 4 weeks, we were able to adopt a digital strategy that didn't exist before. Yes, we can't really see blockchain in there yet, but what we've seen is a movement to telehealth, to education, digital health, digital platforms, working from home. We've completely reorganised our society around the concept of digital. But what's also come at a cost is the uplift of digital crime. So data getting stolen, our identities getting stolen, you know, malware getting installed on computers. So it still really makes sure that we have to be resilient around our digital infrastructure. And this is why this technology matters. So what I really want to talk about tonight is get inside the brains of these incredible women. We're going to ask them some questions. They're going to talk to them, tell us some of their, I guess, background or stories. And then later in the evening, we'll open it up to the floor and we'll get to ask them some questions directly. So I'm going to start with introducing Chloe first. Chloe, to welcome Chloe White, Leanne Kemp and Adriana Belotti to this very special event. I didn't actually see that I was going to be doing any more Women in Blockchain events, but Karen and Amy Rose and I got together and we decided that it was probably time that we did this. So these three women have been at the forefront, visibly working with government around this blockchain roadmap. So Chloe, you've been recently appointed to this position. You're fresh into this role, and I know that this is a really exciting time for you. So I guess I want to ask you a couple of questions, but the first question I want to ask you, and for you to share your story with the room, is why you wanted to do this job. We remember, all of us remember when this job was created, and it created a real buzz in our community. And you were the person that was selected to take that role. So can you tell us why you wanted to do this role? And secondly, I want to know, you know, where do you think that the next 12 months are going to look like in terms of its implementation? So first, a little bit of why, and then a little bit of what. So over to you, Chloe.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. I'm really pleased to be here, and I'm so excited to have taken on this role. Since I was able to step into the role full-time last week, I've received so much enthusiasm from everyone in the community, and it's been really encouraging and a great way to kick things off. I suppose around the time that the role was advertised earlier this year, I had just wrapped up 2 years of work on the initial coin offering review, which some of you might have been involved in as well. So I'd been working on blockchain policy at Treasury, looking at that and a range of other issues related to blockchain, like stablecoins and tokenization and kinds of things related to the finance space. And I thought, well, now that I've finished the ICO review, what's the next thing that I'm going to do? And I had really enjoyed those 2 years of learning about blockchain, getting to know the community. It had really captured my imagination, and I knew that I definitely wanted to stay in the space. And so it was really great timing when this role came up. I guess because my focus previously had been very much on the kind of financial applications and implications of blockchain, this represents an opportunity for me to kind of broaden out and think about blockchain in a slightly broader way, looking beyond the finance sector. And I basically just decided, well, you know, this is going to be really, you know, kind of probably the key role that a public servant could take on to contribute to blockchain in Australia over the next 12 months or so. So, you know, I really just wanted to take it on so that I could just continue the learning journey and try to make a positive contribution. You also asked me a question about the plan for implementation and what the next 12 months looks like. It has absolutely been a really rocky start. The roadmap was launched in February, right before the pandemic, which is really unfortunate timing. But I think, as you said in your introduction, Katrina, there's been some silver linings that have come out of the pandemic, and we've seen that actually, you know, the public service, the whole nation does have the capacity to be quite agile and adapt and work together, and that's something that really excites me, and I think we can really leverage that moving forward, and that's something I really want to focus on in the roadmap over the next 12 months. We have had the first meeting of the newly formed steering committee, and at that meeting there was a big focus on what COVID-19 means for the roadmap. What does it mean for blockchain over the next 12, 18 months? And so I think that what we're collectively doing and what we'd like to involve the community in is trying to understand what that means in terms of challenges, but also opportunities, and how can we use this to actually elevate awareness of blockchain. And so I think the next 12 months is really going to be about opportunity, economic recovery. I think that we're going to have to really carefully prioritise what in the roadmap we choose to focus on. The roadmap is a 5-year plan, so we're not going to get everything done in the first 12 months. But I think what the committee said that it wants to do, and what I want to do, is to be really strategic and to work in a really consultative way with people from all different parts of the community. And that includes startups and enterprise, also includes researchers and academics, and there are not-for-profits and also users of blockchain technology. So also there's a whole government angle, which the roadmap is really strong on. So I think that there's a lot of really good value-adding work that we can do. Some specific actions that we'll take. So the steering committee members have been asked to nominate themselves or each other to lead on particular signposts. So that's something that we're working on at the moment. And that way we'll know that there'll be actual individual people who'll be kind of accountable for driving forward particular action items in the roadmap. And obviously there are the sectoral showcases, which were a really big feature of the roadmap, and a lot of work that went into those. So one of the things that we're working on in the Secretariat is starting to set up the working groups that will specifically be focused on those sectoral showcases. I think it's really important to keep in mind that the roadmap was always intended to be a living document. It's not something static that's set in stone. We always wanted it to be the start of a conversation. And so I think that it does make sense that we do have a look at really how we want to take that kind of strategic approach, prioritising in the context of the new normal that we're now finding ourselves moving to, what we want to achieve. So right now we're really just in that early phase of really identifying, you know, where is it that we want to focus our energy and attention in the first instance. And so there's a lot of conversations happening. I've had so many people in the community reach out and contact me in the last week or two. I've been really enjoying all the conversations that I've been having with a lot of you, and I'm looking forward to keeping that going.
Excellent. So I noticed that we do have Leanne and Adriana in the room now. So I might just zip straight back over to Adriana and Leanne. And I think one of the things we wouldn't mind knowing is who's actually on this committee. Who's on the committee, and what sort of roles are you actually playing now that you've just had your first meeting? So Adriana, tell us who's in the committee, in the blockchain steering committee, because you're now a steering committee.
I have such bad memory. Let me see. So it's Leanne, myself, Chloe, Louise, Nick from Blockchain Australia. There's Jason Potts and Chris Berg from RMIT. The dude from ACX, whose name I forgot, I'm sorry. And who else? Help me, girls. Who else is in there?
You're doing better than me.
Peter Hyam, and also Hannah Glass and Steve Ellis.
Hannah Glass, yes, of course.
And did we mention our two colleagues from CSIRO?
Mark Staples.
And Katie Ford. So that's a dozen in total, not including myself and the Secretariat.
Right, so do we have any government people? Like, you know, when I look at other steering committees, they do have people from different departments actually also participating in these, you know, these really important roadmaps for the adoption of technology, because we all understand that one of the challenges with this technology is around the misunderstanding around, well, if it doesn't have a standard, we can't use it, if I'm going to quote from the DTA, or there's that whole push and pull around regulatory fit for purpose. So speaking of government, Leanne, just if you want to turn on your mic, I'm going to ask you a question. I know that there's the 12 signposts that you've actually got a new roadmap, and there's a lot of them that are focusing on working with and doing this and doing that. So one of the things that I was curious on the language of the recommendation number 4, which talks about government to establish and coordinate a group of government blockchain users. And I was curious, having worked with government and blockchain, that the whole idea of even trying to understand what blockchain is always the first step to the conversation with government. So well, how do you envision this particular signpost?
Look, I think the Queensland Premier is probably the only Premier that's used blockchain in her State of the State speech. If we are to fly the flag for innovation, I do think the Premier at least understands what blockchain is and even knows how to spell it. And I wouldn't say that many of the State of the State speeches or any other Premier in Australia has actually even recognised the technology of importance or even curious about it.
Well, I think we do have Premier Stephen Marshall from Adelaide, who will probably argue on that one, Leanne. But
really, I read his State of the State speech. I couldn't see blockchain in it.
No, he was actually speaking about blockchain 2 years ago. So in his election, when he was getting elected to the Premier, but that's beside the point. But I'm really curious because your role as the Queensland entrepreneur, as well as the CEO and founder of Everledger, really puts you in that sweet spot. Not only do you actually work with this technology and you work globally, but you're also in the day-to-day conversations with government around the importance of digital and the importance of this technology. So I'd be curious if you could share some of your conversations that you're starting to have now with government around this technology and this roadmap.
So, look, I think there are two pieces of the puzzle that need to be solved in the first instance, and COVID is really bringing a whole new dimensionality to recovery. The linear approach to how we're going to recover on the axis of time as we start to walk out of the front door of our houses and return into an office environment is dramatically changing. So governments in the largest part, whether they be local, state and or federally, are focusing on how do they ensure some form of stability in the return of the workforce, and then looking at what is the transition strategy for industries and or technologies of the future. And we've been in an elastic approach of a response, and rightfully so. It's a criticality mortality that has a morbidity rate that we've never seen before in our living time. Suffice to say that we do have a Chief Digital Officer in Queensland Government. We have Chief Scientist, we have a Chief Entrepreneur, we have our Chief Innovation Lead as well, with the Deputy Director General, Sarah Pearson. And the conversations around this technology is being woven into everyday conversations and really being championed. But what is missing is the education. So whilst they know and understand, just like AI is a conversation topic, could I say that there is an innovation army across Queensland that has a deep understanding or can tool up or can even talk to the principles of blockchain? No, not yet. Is that really the collective force of everyone on this call and the government constituents that we either work beside or have connections to? Yes, that's the role. We at least now have a federal roadmap that can be signalled and flagged as a part of that conversation. So it's probably one of the really important horizon flags that the federal government has put down for this entire community. And it's our job to ensure that sentences start and end with blockchain. And the more that can get threaded into the conversations, into procurement, understanding the use cases, what does jobs of the future look like, how do we skill up, that's the work to be done.
Cool, because that's I guess that's the missing piece that we have, I think, collectively in this particular Zoom room for the last 5 years, where we've been wanting to have these conversations with government. And as you rightly say, now that we have the roadmap, we've got stake in the ground, and it's about what happens next. So, Adriana, one of your superpowers is bringing community together. So as mentioned in the roadmap, there's a lot of working with. So it seems to me that the committee are going to need to really have a powerful method of collaboration and engagement. And then how does that get reported back? So from your role as on part of the committee, how do you see this collaboration piece working? Particularly as Leanne so rightly pointed out, the governments are very focused on getting us all back to work. So there's a lot of noise. So how do we cut through, and how do you see the committee's role in bringing out that collaboration and that opportunity for all those sort of pieces to be put together?
I think, as Chloe mentioned, now that we have come back from the COVID post fire and are really getting the committee back in action again, the next step is to form the work groups, and that's where we're going to have people from government, industry, research, and community come into forming these groups. They're going to look at your specific work, use cases, and a part of the mandate of these work groups is develop a process of how this is all going to work. I think this is the next thing to be done in line. We don't have that process yet. We are having discussions about it, but the community involvement in that will be extensive, I'd say.
Yeah, so so I guess that's one of the things is we do have an extensive community in this country, and it is about how do we actually participate? So how do we also help you? I mean, I can imagine what there's about 10 of you. So is there things that you'll be calling out to the community around those sort of working groups and getting us to help out? I think one of the opportunities is that because Australia has taken it in its time to develop this roadmap, we are still seeing, even though we've got one now, for the last 5 years we've been a world leader. If we look at the role of Standards Australia, particularly with Dr. Pip Ryan, if she's on the call, I'm hoping she's here today, the role of Data 61, Everledger, you know, the startup community, our bodies and things like that, they've really led the way. So the good news, I think, is that you don't have to start from ground zero in building out the next stage of the roadmap. But I think for us as the startup community, I sort of feel that we need to move much more quicker. And I understand that we've got COVID and all that sort of stuff, and as Leanne said, you're weaving the conversations through, but there's still the education piece, but also around procurement. So are there any sort of top level areas that as a committee that you'll be looking to in government, particularly federally, that are quick wins, so to speak? Can any one of you talk to more about where you see those quick wins we'll be looking at to start to get this moving, because we can't wait another 12 months. Anyone?
When you say you can wait another 12 months, is that you can wait another 12 months to have the plan moving, or are you looking for any specific action?
I think it's like, you know, I'm going to put probably my startup hat on, and you know, we do have a lot of people in this room at the moment who are either employed in the industry, startups and things like that. That it's really about how do we are able to participate in that economy. How does the startup community participate in an economy where there is a transaction of value coming back to us, where we're able to work with government or industry on use cases and participate in a way that perhaps we haven't been able to in the past. We are all here, but we're still a little bit struggling in a way of getting those breaks. So is there any...
Well, I think, Katrina, one thing I think is the important question to ask, as government asks itself, is what is the role of government? And
right.
if I think about Everledger, 81 countries around the world, at least the positioning around Everledger, you know, caters for 10% of the movement of diamonds, and it's not directly being championed by, or governments are being responsible for the use of blockchain in the diamond industry. It's being driven in the alignment of value and values of an industry that's going through a transition change. So what is the role of government in blockchain?
Correct.
Maybe there isn't one, and maybe that is a part of the formation or the reformation of the working groups in the committee to clearly identify. Government doesn't always have to be the front end user of new technologies or innovations for it to be able to stand up in its own right. Yes, it's a quick pathway. Governments can sign big checks. They can ensure the adoption in some respects, but it's not the only pathway forward for this entire community to show worth.
Well, I guess you're actually raising a couple of really good points here. What is the role of government? And I guess that is that one of the underlying frameworks in the roadmap? We see that with any emerging technology, industry or users are looking for confidence. They're looking for confidence that anything that they do in terms of adopting technology that maybe not unknown, is that they're not going to be penalised in the process, that they're not going to be under the lens of a regulator. I mean, all the work, Chloe, that you did through Treasury, through the ICOs, that was just to ensure that nobody was going to step outside the line and find themselves persecuted. So government to me is, you know, having spent 20 years in government myself and working in water utilities and local government, it's not necessarily about saying to government, we want you to build the ship and steer the ship. Definitely not. What we're asking them is to participate in the building of that ship, so industry and the sectors have confidence that this technology is part of our narrative. And that's, I guess, what we're looking for from these conversations that we're now starting to emerge. Where is the narrative, and where is the incentivization for these narratives to get stronger? Is that the role of the roadmap? I guess that's one of my curiosities around the purpose of the roadmap.
Katrina, I think this is a really important question and a really useful discussion to have. And I personally would like to have more of these kind of discussions in the community, because it is important that there is clarity about what is the role of government. And I really endorse the comments that Leanne made just now, that it's, and I'm glad that you agreed as well, you know, it's not necessarily that we want government to be, you know, the entity in the economy with the highest risk appetite, you know, at the forefront of innovation. I don't think that's what taxpayers expect from the government. But what I learned in the last 2 years working on blockchain policy in Australia is one thing that the industry and the community broadly is very keen to see from government is a clear message and some certainty about what does the framework look like? What are the regulations that do apply, and how can they work with policymakers but also regulators to understand their obligations so that they know where the boundaries are for them to be creative within? And there is a balance that needs to be struck. You made a comment about, you know, being under the lens of the regulators. It's of huge benefit to everyone in Australia, the consumer community, the business community, and the startup community, that Australia maintains its reputation for having a robust regulatory response, you know, particularly in those kind of financial services areas that you were referring to before. And at the same time, we also want to be a nation that really facilitates innovation and encourages people to take risks that are appropriate. So the way that I see the roadmap fitting into this, I think that it does fill one of those gaps that you alluded to around allowing the community to participate in a way that it maybe didn't before. We've always had policy processes where people could be invited to make a submission. Maybe they would be invited to attend a discussion roundtable in a small room. And, you know, not everyone always felt comfortable participating in those processes. And I know that a lot of people in the blockchain community, before they came into the space, might not have engaged with government before. And, you know, a lot of segments of the community are still learning how to work with government. I think government itself is also learning how to work with a lot of these really emerging, cutting edge, disruptive technologies. And it's something I know the government wants to get right. I think that the roadmap is a great opportunity because, as Adriana was saying, when we set up these working groups, you know, the work that the steering committee is going to do with the support of the Secretariat and myself in my role, you know, that I hope will really allow more opportunities than we've ever seen before for that interaction across these different segments of the community. And it's not just about government to business and business to government, you know, it's everybody, it's research, academia, it's community, internationally as well. One of the aspirations of the roadmap is to identify opportunities to collaborate across borders. So there's lots of different entities in the space, there's lots of different connections that we want to form. And I really see one of the key priorities of this roadmap as being a structure that facilitates and enables that kind of cross conversation. I think because the blockchain community is quite young and the technology is still emerging, in my observation, and I don't know if others have experienced this, but it seems to me that sometimes the blockchain community, as small as it is, it can be quite fragmented, and people sometimes aren't having conversations with each other that might be really productive and might help everybody to learn. So I do see this as being a facilitative forum. You know, in terms of some of the other issues that you raised, I would stress that the roadmap doesn't replace existing government forums where blockchain policy is discussed. All of those pre-existing forums like the Council of Financial Regulators, DLT Working Group, you know, they will still be there, still assessing policy considerations related to blockchain. The roadmap complements and adds to all of that. So I think that hopefully what we'll find is that this fills that gap that you were talking about in terms of closer collaboration.
Okay, so we talk about, excellent. So when we talk about the use cases that have been identified in the roadmap, on the basis of new information that we now have around COVID and where the government or where Australia is now having those really interesting conversations, I think everyone can agree that we're not having the same conversations that we had 2 months ago. So is there going to be is there going to be more room in the roadmap to explore use cases that are beyond supply chains? That may be picking up some of the things that we didn't actually know existed that have now become important. To ensure that we're not looking backwards, I think a lot of the community are very aware that supply chain is an excellent use case for this technology and doesn't necessarily need to prove its capability in creating those digital experiences, all those components of traceability and provenance. So I guess we're looking for is what would the use cases, well, first of all, what are the use cases to prove? And secondly, is there room for additional use cases in light of what we now know about with COVID? These are the conversations that the steering committee are looking at.
I'm happy to kick off. I could not agree with you more, and absolutely there are going to be those opportunities. So as I said, the roadmap is not set in stone, it's a living document, and one of the major themes that emerged in the first meeting of the steering committee is that we have to look at this in the context of what makes sense now in the COVID-19 paradigm and the conversations that we're having as a nation about how we move forward and rebuild. One thing that I would point out is the use cases that were identified in the roadmap. they don't necessarily all lend themselves to the same type of activities, but what they all have in common is they all provide an opportunity to raise awareness and education, help to build a more sophisticated understanding of what is it about blockchain technology that's value adding. What does blockchain give us that existing technologies do not? What is that? What is that across a range of uses? So when we talk about supply chains, for example, the case study in the roadmap was about wine exports. What I don't want to see from the roadmap is a situation where, we get really hung up on this one particular application, and then Joe Bloggs on the street says, well, I'm not a wine exporter, so why do I care? What does this have to do with me? It's about that bigger picture story that says, well, actually the reason why this technology is useful, and it happens to be wine exports or supply chains or credentialing or whatever, is because the technology is actually providing you with a governance arrangement that allows people in a network to work together in a way that they haven't been able to in the past. Those are the kind of messages that I think we need to focus attention on. And so it's about finding the right way to establish these different working groups, to make that real for people and to demonstrate it in a tangible way, but without losing the essence of that message. So one of the things that the steering committee is going to do next is to actually identify additional use cases that could form working groups. And so we're not limited to what's in the roadmap. And we're hoping that this will be a rolling process where the steering committee will regularly be able to put forward suggestions, and we will try to set up working groups that we think are really relevant in this post-COVID world.
Excellent. So will the community, obviously you'll be going out to calling out for particular use cases? Will you be looking at existing use cases that are already here, or will they be really COVID? So one of the things that got bantered around in the early days when COVID started, which some other countries are considering, like if we're going to return to work or return to travel, will there be a requirement for an immunity credential? Like we've got credentials in the use map. Is there a shift to start looking at what an immutable credentials would look like and where blockchain technology would be playing in that? Or there's, I guess there's some of the questions that we talk about that, the technology is there, it doesn't create truth. Sometimes that gets messed up with this whole idea of what this technology is. It's only as good as the data that goes in. So is there any conversations about what those use cases might look like to get us back to work or to actually get us mobile again?
I mean, I'll comment. I think there's a bit of a danger that we're all aware of, that if you sort of front end this on use cases that are named industries or named environments, that it will become quite narrow. And I think principally we need to work on the foundational values for a decentralized future and a distributed future, right? We can't necessarily just look at this from a perspective of saying even provenance and wine or diamonds. We should be saying what are the principal foundations that this committee and the working groups need to, and we could probably break them down into 4 broad pillars of transparency and accessibility, privacy and security, agency and interoperability, and accountability and governance. Then if COVID comes and goes, which it will, whether the wine industry survives or dies, which who knows, then at least we've baselined a set of principles upon which applications can be blockchain based, and that we can preserve parts of those principles of rights and principles of immutability under credentials. I think that's the big working piece now, because governments, whether it be state, local, or even federal, are truly concerned for the survivability of industries that we have once relied upon. Tourism, a prime example. Who really knows when the openings of our national borders will be truly re-enlivened? And if we have to rethink tourism, how would we rethink it? We might face, unlikely, but we might face the existential crisis. We already lost manufacturing in Australia, and now we have to rethink how we bring it back. But if we rethink with governments bringing back these industries or creating new industries, then maybe we should be thinking more at a principles base under those 4 pillars. Therefore, it doesn't matter if it's wine or diamonds. It underlies the principle of the values of actually having a distributed and decentralized future.
I agree with that 100%. I think it's important to think about blockchain is about consensus and everybody working around the same rules that what allows people that don't trust each other and don't know each other to connect and exchange data and information. It doesn't matter if it's wine or serology, the information is, you know, it doesn't have to be identified right now because the use case is broad and will incorporate everything. And to that point, it's also to what you said earlier, Katrina, once we identified what the steps are and how the consensus mechanism work, then, you know, startups that are small and just beginning to get traction will be able to play on the same field that big companies do, because everybody will be playing by the same rules. And that is something that I think we have to focus and make sure it's there from the very beginning.
Excellent. Look, I'm mindful of time, and I think we should get some questions from the room. I can see that there's a furious amount of activity on the chat room. So I might just ask Karen to assist me with facilitating some of those questions, because have you actually pulled out some of those questions, Karen, for us to answer?
Amy Rose, can you see them, Amy Rose? She's on silent. She might be sending them to you privately.
Oh, they have all been sent to Katrina. So,
so that's what you're seeing in your activity there.
All right. So I am needing to find out where all these questions are. Okay, so here we go. I got some comments. I've got lots of comments, but I'm just wondering, perhaps there's a question here. So from governments have many roadmaps from agriculture to lithium. Isn't blockchain simply a technology and a mindset that can support various sectors and roadmaps? This is the approach in EU. I'm wondering if their approach has been looked at, integrating blockchain conversations into other roadmaps. Is there a conversation happening with the AI team, for example? Is there conversations happening across the different areas of roadmaps that are currently underway? Leanne, I know that the Queensland government is investing heavily in AI. Is that sort of conversation coming? Is there a bridge or a blended conversation happening?
So I guess the government's identified that artificial intelligence, robotics, 4AR technologies, blockchain, all of the building blocks for the state, particularly as we start considering the industries that need to be rethought or enlivened. Is there a deliberate set of work with named principles here that are making those connections? I can honestly say no, with the exception of maybe the chief entrepreneur myself that has an understanding of how we would make those connections. But to what end at the moment? At the moment, reliably, governments are hugely embedded within COVID, but we're coming out of those recovery mechanisms now and looking at that transition strategy. So hence why I was saying the time now is for us to be able to really dig in with education and start putting these use cases forward, and not just ones that sit on PowerPoint presentations, but to put the efforts behind it to show what is actually decently possible.
Yeah, I agree. I have got a really great question here, and this is one of my favorites because I'm always asking this question. As governments start to unlock spending on physical infrastructure to stimulate our economy again, is there a push to start to spend our government spending on digital infrastructure? That digital infrastructure that underpins this physical infrastructure. We don't see those two conversations, well, those two things coming together in conversations. If we think about Infrastructure Australia, it's about building roads and building bridges and this and this. But we all understand that we need to also have that digital infrastructure, because what will be created out of all of this is data. Data, huge amounts of data about buildings and about roads and people's training and education and health. So is there a desire to start to think about digital infrastructure as much as we talk about physical infrastructure?
I'm happy to talk about that, Katrina. In terms of digital infrastructure as a concept, that's something that is addressed in the signposts. So you could say that it's definitely one of those priority areas to consider. If the government was interested in providing finance to creating anything like that or contributing to anything like that, I would certainly not be the person to make that announcement on behalf of the government. So I can't speculate on any of those kinds of decisions. But in terms of the comment before about, you know, there's a roadmap for this and a roadmap for that, and how does it all fit together? You know, that's a really great question. And what's actually happened in the Department of Industry just last week is, when we closed down the PPE task force that was procuring supplies for the National Medical Stockpile, rather than reverting back to the policy structures that we had before around digital technology, we actually reorganised ourselves. And so under the new structure that came into effect last Monday, what we've actually done is we've housed blockchain with AI, quantum, Internet of Things, all the emerging technologies are now housed in one team. So as part of my role as the blockchain roadmap lead, I'm also every day talking to my colleagues who are thinking about AI strategy, quantum, and so on. And we're starting to have these conversations now about, how does it all fit together? How do they complement each other? What are the common obstacles that you face with emerging technologies? And there are a lot of commonalities. You know, I know a lot of you in this community are interested in other emerging technologies besides blockchain, and you would have seen that, you know, there's a lot of these common themes around access to skills, access to capital, you know, making sure that regulation is modern, you know, those kinds of issues around helping to mainstream the technology, making sure that people understand it. You know, so it absolutely makes sense to me that you would think about that bigger picture, broader context, and that is definitely the direction that we're moving in the Department of Industry. It is a common thing that you see in governments around the world, that they tend to have these roadmaps or strategies that kind of pick out, you know, one technology at a time, and they do sometimes feel a bit disjointed. But you know, I hope that it does provide you some assurance to know that under the new structure that we're working with, those conversations are absolutely taking place.
Right, I've got a question from Greg Freeman. Hey Greg, it's good to have you here. I don't know if you're on Australian soil yet. Greg has a question for Chloe. Chloe mentioned in the first committee meeting centred on COVID-19. Greg wants to know, wanted to have clarification on that. Does she mean roadmap focus would be how blockchain tech can be applied to help with COVID specifically, or does she mean using blockchain to help in the financial recovery from COVID? That is, encouraging innovation. Examples would be technology agnostic security laws, opening up investment in Australia. So the question is, were the meeting around COVID about how blockchain technology can help with the COVID recovery? That's where the technology can be used, or is it in to encourage financial recovery?
Yeah, sure. Good to hear from you, Greg. And the answer is that it's both. We're not having a narrow conversation in one direction or another. I know that the steering committee, and I won't speak too much on their behalf and let Leanne and Adriana comment as well, but the steering committee has come forward to discuss ideas that are specifically around how blockchain can help with issues like you know, serology and other kind of very particular medical issues that are specific to COVID. But, you know, there's also a big conversation that's happening around what role blockchain plays in the economic recovery, and happy for the steering committee members to comment on anything that they're interested in as well.
That would be great if we could, because we've almost got to wrap up because we need to go into our rooms, but that would probably be a really great place to finish up and say, what is, what are you actually talking about in the committee?
We talked about identification, I think, was one of the issues that came from the first wave of problems with COVID, where there were those big lines of people going to Centrelink, trying to get identified to get on to the benefits. And that would be a way, one of the use cases that blockchain could help in the future. But that opens the discussion to, should we have a national sovereign, should identity be sovereign or national managed? So this is something that we have discussed in the first committee group, but that's just the beginning of the conversation. I think a lot more needs to be talked about in that. And the community input in that is very important. What does everybody think it should be? Should we all have, should our identities be sovereign? Should we in 2030 be running our own nodes and helping you know, transport all this data? I don't know.
Those are big questions, because that's you know, that's at the heart of everything, is our digital identity. And that's still a question that we continually ask over and over again. How do you actually verify digital identity? How do you actually look at credentials? What is that role and play? And we know that the Digital Transformation Agency has been trying for years to solve this problem at an enormous amount of cost. As a company that deals with this technology, you know, we have to bury the private keys and all that sort of stuff into the tech. We can't really build solutions where you need to include, you know, upload things into your browsers and things like that. We have to really be careful about how the user's going to work. And there's a lot of big, as Leanne said, it's a massive amount of education piece to start educating people on how to protect their own data, let alone their own identity. So I wanted to, so I'm mindful that we'll probably have to get into our room. So just last comments. Chloe, Adriana, Leanne, if you've got some just last comments just to offer the groups, and then we'll disappear into the Zoom rooms. So Chloe, did you want to make a final comment tonight before we disappear into our rooms?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a great discussion, and I'm looking forward to the breakout rooms as well. My final comment would be just to reiterate, the roadmap is really a dynamic document, and that might sound like a throwaway phrase, but you know, I know that the steering committee and myself and the Secretariat are really genuinely committed to making this a really collaborative process. You know, this is not something that is a kind of tick and flick exercise. We really want to have, you know, some sophisticated conversations with everyone across the community about what is really value adding here, and try to be as clear as possible about what we think we can achieve. So, you know, I would say really look for opportunities, and feel free to get in touch. I try to make myself as available as possible. That was the way that I operated on cryptocurrency and other blockchain issues in Treasury, and I'm certainly aiming to do the same in this role as well. I'm on LinkedIn, Chloe White, if you want to search me and get in touch there. It is taking me a while to respond to everyone, and I'm sorry about that. It's been a really busy couple of weeks stepping into the role, but you know, I do promise I'll get around to everyone, and I'm looking forward to having more of these kinds of engagements, so that, you know, everyone can see that, you know, we're trying to operate as transparently as possible and make sure that everyone understands, you know, where we're devoting our energy, and I'm really pleased to be a part of the team.
Wonderful, thank you so much, Chloe. Adriana.
So Andreas Antonopoulos, he's got a really good acronym for good blockchains. It's RIPCORD. So revolutionary, immutable, public, collaborative, open, resistant to censorship, and decentralized. So thinking about that, my pipe dream would be for this roadmap to create an ecosystem that is de-risked by design. So small players can also play in the game of providing services to government, and, you know, make sure that it's accessible to everyone. And on top of that, come to a meetup, let's discuss this more, let's have more of these conversations. I'm sure there'll be opportunities for everybody to, you know, give their input if so they choose to.
That's excellent, and I completely agree with you, Adriana. I think we have to be open source. That's the priorities of the way we build our digital infrastructure. We must be open source so innovation can thrive and everyone can participate. Leanne, I think you're probably going to get asked to repeat your pillars again, because everyone's really quite interested in what you had to say about your pillars. So you're probably going to be asked again when you get into your room. But what would you?
Okay, no problem. So look, I think there's a few things here. We have collegiate values and value that we can all leverage here in this group, and we know how to collaborate, and we certainly are a very communicative bunch, but we're really bad at coordination. And I think that if we start to think about the power of the collective value, just on this call alone, just shy of 100 people that are able to sort of contribute various connections in and around government and or into industry, if we were able to think about not just only where the blockchain roadmap sits, but identify very clearly some of the industry or other federal and state government initiatives, whether it be lithium and the battery supply chain, a future batteries industry, whether it be wine traceability, whether it be, you know, decentralized or distributed identity, and come together in a far more coordinated, collegiate manner, we're probably going to be able to trampoline over the top of waiting for government to help us with the guiding light principles on a roadmap. And to get there, then we're starting to then, you know, remove the conversation is, should it be wine, should it be lithium, should it be what have you? And we're going back into those 4 pillar principles so that we can all build together collectively on that, you know, on that framework for the principles of the decentralized sort of future and the foundational values. So we've got to get a better coordination set amongst stuff. When we have 100 people, we're really just sitting as a strategy siloed in a blockchain roadmap. I'd love to actually tap the shoulder and say, well, we want to be involved in the energy roadmap. We want to be involved in the battery roadmap. We want to be involved in the water trading roadmap. And if we were able to do that, we then become horizontally threaded as nearly like a Where's Wally. And then you can't be ignored because you're coming up every single time.
Yeah, look, you're absolutely right. Look, Leanne, I'm so pleased that you said that because there's a lot of us on this call today who either have blockchain companies or involved in the community in some way, but we've now moved out of the whole concept of a blockchain focus. We're all about the sectors that we actually work in. So we actually are engaging with the water conversation in a very different way that we were doing 2 or 3 years ago. But it has to come from, so now we work with irrigators and we work with farmers and things like that to actually educate them, which leads into that catalytic effect into the irrigator community, and then reversing back into government. And that's basically, it has been our strategy now going forward, is we're sort of like reversing back into government and going, look what's going out there in the industry. You need to now participate. You don't have to, you know, steer the ship, but you need to be participating because these will have regulatory impacts. So
there's probably a piece of work that this group can do. Like Everledger is pretty simple. Provenance, traceability, not just only first time use, but second use in circular economy. We'd be happy to put it forward and say, out of the 100 people here, if there is a decentralized app, there's skill sets, there's some type of AI integration, we're open for business. That's a powerful proposition to put forward into government. It can't then be ignored, right? Because you're taking a whole of industry sector into government rather than just coming with a technology that largely requires other technologies to really perform and outperform.
Yeah, agreed. And we're starting to, see that with the, with commission of inquiries, and where we've actually got some government departments actually pushing their hands up and say, we think blockchain technology needs to be part of the conversation. So we've come a long way in the last 5 years. So I guess I'm really excited about what's going to happen in the next 12 months. I just want to acknowledge Lucy Lynn, who's just in the room now. Lucy did an amazing job on Q&A on Monday night, raising a conversation around female founders, but also around blockchain technology on national television. Go Lucy, she did a great job. So we're all going to head into our meeting rooms, but I just wanted to thank everyone and thank Karen and Amy Rose behind the scenes who worked really hard in putting all of this together. Leanne, I know how crazy busy your world is, being on founder, working in these crazy times. So I really appreciate that you found time to participate tonight. And Chloe, welcome. So great to have you on board. And Adriana, as always, great to have you participating, and also having your voice in that committee is really